The Beara Breifne Way is Ireland's longest waymarked trail. Stretching for 700 kilometres, it crosses the country from the Beara Peninsula in the far southwest of Ireland to the village of Blacklion in County Cavan on the border with Northern Ireland. This is not a trail built for those seeking action-packed days. Much of it follows quiet roads, old paths and open hillsides, linking together places that feel overlooked. It winds its way through mountains, bogs, farmland, forests and small towns and villages. It's a quiet route where the landscape and weather sets the pace, and where long stretches of solitude are not the exception but the rule. There are no crowds, few signposts, and long distances between campsites and services. In May 2025, I set out to walk the Beara Breifne Way from end to end, starting on the edge of the Atlantic, carrying everything I needed and letting the days unfold as they would. What followed was a journey shaped as much by the weather as by the mountains and miles. It was shaped by the people I met along the way and the generosity and kindness shown to me by complete strangers. The first section of the trail begins by following sections of the Beara Way, and in typical Irish fashion it began with getting completely soaked. Rain fell heavily for the entire day, steady and unavoidable. There was no hiding from it. The mountains and the sea stayed mostly hidden, wrapped tightly in cloud, but the rain revealed other things. Waterfalls spilled down hillsides, and rivers surged and flooded across the land, loud and restless after days of rain. Underfoot, the ground was completely saturated. Every step landed on something soft. More than once I had to stop, sit down and pour water out of my boots, knowing full well they'd fill again within minutes. I met two hikers walking in the opposite direction doing the Beara Way. We exchanged a few words, but the rain kept the conversation short. It wasn't a day for lingering, it was a day for moving forward and getting the miles in. There are only a few campsites along the Beara Breifne Way, but in the first few days, thankfully, there are a few. Soaked through, I was aiming for one of these on day one. By evening, I reached the campsite in Adrigole, where the real luxury wasn't a view or a sunset, but a tumble dryer. For hours, I fed wet clothes into warm air, preparing for the next day. The second day began dry, thankfully. The route climbed almost immediately, but this time the reward was clear views stretching across valleys and hillsides, finally visible after the curtain of rain had lifted. The ground was still heavy and wet, holding on to the rain from the previous day's weather, but everything looked brighter for it. The land felt freshly washed, colours deepened and sharpened by rain. I didn't meet another hiker all day. As the hours passed, it was as if the trail itself was quietly telling me that solitude would be part of this journey. The Beara Breifne Way isn't a path you share with crowds, it's one you walk mostly alone. As I descended towards Glengarriff, the views opened up further, and I felt a sense of gratitude simply to see the landscape clearly again. After the first day's soaking, it felt like being welcomed properly onto the trail. I started the third day with a big breakfast in Glengarriff, knowing the miles ahead would demand it. The morning brought long stretches of road walking, and despite what people often say about walking on roads, I didn't mind at all. With the rain falling steadily once again, the solid ground felt reassuring, even if it meant fewer wild views. It also meant that my feet stayed dry. But as the day went on, the rain became heavier. Eventually, I reached a turn-off for Cale Kill, where I'd originally planned to stop for the night. It was still early in the day and I stood there weighing my options. Spend the remaining hours sitting inside a tent listening to the rain, or keep walking through it. I chose to walk. I turned towards Bere, committing to the weather and the distance. The rain never ceased, not for a moment. Somewhere along the way, I met a man living quietly in the woods. He filled my bottles with fresh spring water and sent me on my way with a spring in my step. The final climb before Bere was swallowed by fog and rain. Visibility shrank to little more than the next marker post, but the trail was still clear. Eventually, I descended out of the mist and arrived, soaked through and tired. I went to the hotel to find food and ask about pitching my tent nearby. Instead, the owner found me a room. He let me dry my boots and clothes overnight, an act of generosity that felt enormous after days of dampness. It would be the last night of the entire journey where drying gear was needed. From here on, the weather had decided I'd had enough rain. After a deeply restful night in Bere, I set out again, now following the Slí Gaeltach Muscry. The first section towards Ballingeary was mostly on quiet roads, gently easing me back into the rhythm of walking. There was a wooded stretch along the way, and just before Ballingeary, a boggy section that reminded me the land still held plenty of water. In Ballingeary, I stopped to eat and restock before continuing on the road to Ballyvourne. This part of the route offered some truly beautiful moments, especially as it crossed the mountains. though much of it still followed roads rather than paths. It was a day of contrasts, quiet stretches, open views and long steady miles. As I approached Ballyvourne, the rain returned once more, but lightly this time. I managed to get the tent up just before it arrived properly, crawling inside dry and content, listening to the rain from a place of shelter rather than struggle. The fifth morning began wrapped in mist, but it soon lifted and the day dried out into something clearer and calmer. It was a strange day of walking. Several sections of the official route were closed, damaged by weather or waterlogged beyond use. Someone, though, had taken the time to post warning signs, small acts of care for those who might come this way. I followed the Beara Breifne Way cycle route up towards Malachanish, on quiet country roads but always steadily climbing. On some sections I had to climb over or around trees still down from Storm Éowyn, a sight I was to see throughout this trail. From here the trail passed through forestry and a vast wind farm. The landscape felt altered, shaped heavily by human hands. The route itself had also been altered by human hands, with detour and keep out signs in many places. Eventually it became a matter of finding my own way out of the wind farm before skirting around Clara Mountain and descending towards Mill Street. In Mill Street, I picked up a stamp in my Beara Breifne Way passport. While many places are listed as stamp locations, the reality is more complicated. Some are no longer open, others keep limited hours. I managed to collect stamps along the route, but completing the full set would be nearly impossible. Still, each stamp felt meaningful, a quiet record of distance covered, of weather endured, and of days spent walking steadily northward. Arriving into Mill Street, I also left the Slí Gaeltacht Voscry and got ready to begin the next section, the North-West Cork Way. Looking back, it was a day I left the section I truly loved and began one that did not leave the same feelings. Day 6 was a day for covering distance and little else. From morning to evening the route stayed mostly on roads, quiet ones for the most part, designed more for moving forward than for stopping to admire views. The day did begin on a gentler note, with a crossing over the river Blackwater. In years past this would have meant stepping carefully across stones, but there is now a bridge and I crossed with dry feet. The roads were quiet, and the locals I met along the way were friendly and curious, often stopping to ask where I was headed or what exactly I was walking. Those brief conversations broke up the miles, small moments in an otherwise solitary day. Not all of the roads were peaceful. Some carried fast-moving traffic, and more than once I had to step off onto the verge waiting for cars to pass. Still, the sun stayed out and the rain stayed away. After days of wet weather, it felt like a gift to simply walk without worrying about getting soaked. Near the end of the day, the trail slipped briefly away from tarmac and into the Island Wood in Newmarket, a shaded green section that felt all the more beautiful as it sheltered me from the sun. In Newmarket, I went searching for a stamp for my Beara Breifne Way passport. The places listed were closed, but a woman in the local supermarket took it upon herself to help. A few phone calls later, Scanlon's pub opened especially so I could get my stamp. Another small kindness that carried me into the evening. Day 7 was entirely on roads. I drifted through the day, not really taking in any views. The road itself was quiet, but it rose and fell constantly, never quite letting the legs settle. This stretch also marked the end of the North-West Cork Way. Walking it, I couldn't shake the feeling that it had existed mainly as a connector, something pieced together to link the Slí Gaeltacht Voscry with the Ballyhowra Way. It served its purpose, but it didn't linger in the memory. Still, not every day on a long trail needs to be memorable. Some days are simply about continuing.